Hello, friends. So I will just pin up my presentation and introduce myself as well. So I am Micah MacColl Nicholson. I use she and they pronouns, and I am currently the program associate for Quaker Engagement at FCNL. So I started with FCNL last September, a part of one of their young adult programs, their young adult fellowship, previously known as internships or FCNL interns. But I have the honor to continue working with FCNL over the next year. Most of my work is around organizing Quakers and some of our other interfaith partners to get involved in our democratic processes and some of the work that we're doing on Capitol Hill. And that's a little bit about my work. I also just wanted to introduce myself as a Quaker as well. I was actually raised a part of Media Monthly Meeting, which I know is relatively close to Arch Street compared to other meetings across the country. And also, since we're going to be talking about some Quaker advocacy and Quaker lobbying, I want to preface this by saying I am not a natural lobbyist. I am drawn to way more informal ways of interacting with people, and my background is in education and social work. But I do this work with FCNL specifically because I feel called to do it and to connect my faith to something bigger, bigger than just my own experiences of people and with other people, and because laws and policies shape how we all live together. So that is a little bit about me. I realize my presentation got started a little bit before I was expecting it to, so I apologize for that. But I'm joining you all here this evening to talk about spirit and action, and specifically the way that FCNL approaches lobbying for the world that we seek. So I just introduced myself a little bit, and I want to encourage, we have a small enough group of 4 people, 5 people. I see that Alexander has joined with us as well. But I want to hear how you all are showing up in this space this evening. You can either raise your physical hand or send it in the chat if you don't want to share. But if you're willing to share your name and pronouns, and also either what led you to join this conversation this evening, and or what you know of FCNL coming into this conversation. Does anyone feel led to introduce themselves first? John, I believe it is. I'll ask you to unmute.
Hi, Micah. I'm John. Hi, everybody. I know the other people. I was interested in Friends legislation a few years back. I'm relatively new to the meeting. I'm a new member. I came aboard October 15th. So I'm still learning a lot about Quakerism. I danced around Quakerism for quite a few years and before making a commitment. So I want to see how this part or this aspect of Quakerism is coming along, and maybe there's a niche for me to do something productive or proactive. Thank you. And he, they pronouns.
You were sharing, Don. Is anyone else willing to introduce themselves?
My name is Ray Cook, and I've been a Quaker for 35 years, and I'm very happy to be a Quaker. I'm very happy with my Quaker experiences, my Quaker friends, my Quaker activities, and I'm very glad to be here tonight.
Do you have any experience or knowledge of FCNL before coming into this conversation, Ray?
If he doesn't respond, I will introduce myself, Alexander Barnes. I'm the FCNL contact for the Adelphi monthly meeting. I've been in close touch with FCNL for decades.
Wonderful. Happy to have you. Lois, I think I also.
I'm Lois. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a fan of FCNL. I get the newsletter. It helps keep me abreast of what's going on with Congress and what they're up to. And I'm really glad to have you here talking to us tonight.
Thank you for sharing, Lois.
I'm planning to go to the annual meeting. I've been to the last dozen or so. I didn't go during the pandemic. And I have mixed feelings about the new site. I talked to Bridget about that. I explained to her there wasn't that convenient service to the Capitol from there, but they'll probably handle that.
We'll do our best, but I'll bring back some notes from this program, Alexander, and I would be happy to convey that
Just
concern
say
as well.
hi to Bridget for me.
I would be happy to. Is there anyone else who feels led to introduce themselves in this space before I start throwing some information at you? I think most people have shared. Okay. I will also send in the chat right now for people who are able to attend programs in person or at the time that they are provided and recorded. We like to keep a track of who's able to attend those programs. So this is a virtual guest book that we use to keep track of who's able to collect the information as it's being shared, although I know some friends like to watch the recordings of these videos. So I also want to give us a little bit of an outline for the plan for the evening, so you all know what you are getting yourselves into. I'm going to share a little bit about FCNL, about our history, and then a little bit about what Quaker advocacy is, some of the roots of Quaker advocacy and some of the branches of how it's showing up in the world today. And then specifically FCNL's approach to lobbying and Quaker lobbying. We take a particular approach founded in Friends' values, and just to share with those in this community about what that looks like and how you can get involved. Also, depending on timing, there's a couple of really impactful stories that I've picked up over the last year working with FCNL, and they really characterize what spirit and action specifically in the advocacy realm looks like. And I want to share those all with you. Then throughout the program, if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your virtual hand or send a question in the chat. Lois or Susanna, if you see that there is a lingering question that I have not picked up, since I'll be seeing mostly the presentation, feel free to unmute and share it. But I do ask that Susanna or Lois is the one to kind of clerk those questions out of the chat if I miss them. But then we'll have a little bit of structured question and conversation time before I close up with some upcoming opportunities and events for people that they can get involved with. How's that sound, friends? Thumbs up? Well, that's the plan. Okay, so to start for this evening, I know that friends can come into information sessions like this with a wide variety of experience. We have one Quaker contact and other friends who are possibly just starting. But to share about FCNL, the Friends Committee on National Legislation, or FCNL, is a national nonpartisan Quaker organization that lobbies Congress and the administration to advance peace, justice, and environmental stewardship. It was founded in 1943 in Richmond, Indiana, actually. And it was based on Friends' values wanting to show up within federal policymaking and doing so in an organized manner that I'll get into in a little bit of detail later on in the presentation. But as I mentioned, we work specifically around Friends' values of peace and justice and environmental stewardship. And we talk to Congress to pass laws and make changes in pursuit of those values. And although FCNL specifically is the lobbying organization, we have also FCNL Education Fund and FCNL's Friends Place on Capitol Hill that does a lot of our community engagement and civic engagement work, which helps us work with people of all ages and backgrounds and beliefs. And although we're a Quaker organization, we pride ourselves on not working just with Quakers. We have a lot of interfaith coalitions and partners that we know we need to do this work successfully with. So with that, I want to share some of our FCNL legislative priorities for the upcoming year. These legislative priorities change every 2 years with every new Congress. We go through the priorities setting process that we are actually in the process of conducting right now. So we asked a bunch of Quaker meetings, Quaker organizations, Quaker schools to tell us what they find to be the most important issues for us to be working on within the legislative and political landscape currently. And we collect all 250 plus responses that we got this year. And currently our policy committee is reviewing those in great detail and finalizing them, and they'll be shared at our annual meeting in November. But our priorities for this year, after we've done that whole process for the 118th Congress, we're looking at priorities of ceasefire in Israel and Palestine with the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. We are looking to expand the child tax credit, which helps pull millions of children in the United States above the poverty line. We're also looking to rein in wasteful Pentagon spending. That is the issue of our advocacy teams for the upcoming year. They'll be advocating for that issue, as I said, for the next year. And then also, we are still having a priority around creating a Truth and Healing Commission on U.S. Indian boarding school era policies. And there has actually been some movement in Congress that I'll give a little bit more detail on. That'll be in the next week, which we're really happy to be hearing about. So as I mentioned, FCNL was started in 1943 by a group of 15 Quaker organizations. And to honor that momentous 80-year anniversary, we put together this video, FCNL 80, an insistent voice for peace. So I want to share that with you all this evening, since it really gives a great background and look forward to how we're going to continue our Quaker advocacy in the world today. And Lois, I'm going to be looking at you. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear sound all right? Thank you.
80 years.
80 years.
80 years.
80 years.
80 years.
80 years. 80 years.
As the oldest registered religious lobby in Washington, D.C., FCNL has faithfully lobbied Congress and numerous presidential administrations for 80 years. FCNL is composed of the Friends Committee on National Legislation, the FCNL Education Fund, and Friends Place on Capitol Hill. Together, these three Quaker, nonprofit, and nonpartisan groups form one of the most effective change agents in Washington, working to advance peace, justice, and environmental stewardship through lobbying, education, civic engagement, and hospitality.
We need to be brave enough to change. Anything that's constant about Quakerism, it's our needing to be open to continuing revelation. And that means being courageous enough to know that we need to continue changing and evolving and responding to the needs that the world has.
Established by Quakers in Richmond, Indiana in 1943, FCNL began lobbying against military conscription and for aid to Europe during World War II. Since the beginning, our legislative policy has been rooted in the belief that there is that of God in every person. From defeating mandatory military training to helping to thaw relations with China, FCNL's first 30 years were marked by efforts to stop violent conflict around the world and address root causes by changing public policy through legislation.
It's fair to say that what attracted me the most to Quakerism is a peace testimony. You can apply this knowledge to peaceful purposes. That's possible.
FCNL has remained steadfast in its commitment to a more peaceful and just world, from promoting laws that provided relief to Europe during and after World War II, and playing a significant role in the creation of the Peace Corps in 1961, to preventing future wars. In the 70s, Ed Snyder led efforts to cancel the appropriations of $474 million to the South Vietnamese military, expediting an end to the U.S. war in Vietnam. And in the 80s, FCNL helped thaw relations with the Soviet Union and built congressional support for a series of international treaties to reduce the number of nuclear weapons and lessen the threat of war. In the 1990s, FCNL helped to ratify the UN Convention on Chemical Weapons and then advocated for the United States to adopt a code of conduct on arms transfers. However, no one knew then how much the 9/11 terrorist attacks would catalyze a pivotal shift in U.S. foreign policy and mark an important point in FCNL history.
Right away, the staff went to work on what's the United States going to do and what can we say about this now. The one we kept coming back to was war is not the answer.
Repealing the authorization for the use of military force clearly was central to the work that FCNL has done, and working with Congressman Barbara Lee was really rewarding. And it was rewarding to work with that office, and her also to see how relationships with other members of Congress developed, and also how FCNL Advocacy Network cultivated and instructed and helped those members of Congress understand why it was in the benefit of our country to repeal that authorization of use of military force, and how it was really good governance for Congress to take back the authorization.
In March of 2023, the Senate voted to repeal the 2002 authorization for use of military force against Iraq, a historic moment for FCNL advocates nationwide.
We think what we're going through right now is bad. It is, but it has been bad in other times too. And in just contemporary history, it has been bad with World War I. It has been bad with a global depression. It has been bad with World War II, and then the Cold War, and then in the United States in the 50s. But we keep going, and we keep making positive change.
FCNL carries a persistent, prophetic, and powerful commitment toward our vision of the world we seek.
The wonderful thing about this poem is that it is a statement of mission that concisely shows the intersection of all these different important issues that not only Friends care about, but people everywhere in the world care deeply.
We seek a world free of war and the threat of war. We seek a society with equity and justice for all. We seek community where every person's potential can be fulfilled. We seek an earth restored.
So friends, I will be more than happy to share that link. There's actually about 8 more minutes of that video. But due to time and attention, I want to share some other information with you all. But that video is a great summary of the work that we have done and are continuing to do, and also encourages us to keep moving, as was shared by one of the previous FCNL General Secretaries. So we referenced the World We Seek poem, but we also have 3 theories of change at FCNL that ground us in our work. The first of which is relationship building, We recognize, and in connection to our Quaker faith and values, that there is that of God within every person that we meet with, whether that's a congressperson, one of their staffers, one of our coalition partners. And we recognize the need to be building relationships and honoring that piece of God that is within every person, no matter where we're going or what we're doing. In addition to relationship building, we are also focused on deep listening. So as we enter into these various spaces, we recognize that there are issues or items that we are bringing to the conversation, but in order to really move forward and to enact meaningful and long-lasting change, we need to deeply listen to what other people are bringing into the space, what their perspectives are, what their values, and really honoring that within these difficult conversations. The third kind of seed for the way we go about our change making, whether in Quaker advocacy or within lobbying specifically, is storytelling. One of my colleagues uses this phrase that gives me chills almost every time she uses it, which is, an office won't remember what statistics you shared. Even though public policy is ran by statistics and by numbers and facts, what a congressperson or what their staff will remember is the way you made them feel. And we have found that by sharing constituent stories, having them share their stories, not paraphrasing what's going on, not trying to tell other people's stories, but by telling the stories and perspectives that they themselves have experienced and the way they know that these policies are influencing them in their lives, that is how we are going to enact change, by reminding policymakers and those in the government and who hold power to act on behalf of those constituents that they are representing. So the video referenced the World We Seek poem also, that we seek a world free of war and the threat of war. We seek a society with equity and justice for all. We seek a community where every person's potential may be fulfilled, and we seek an earth restored. So this poem is not only our mission statement as an organization, it is also connected to our statement of legislative policy for our lobbying organization. I want to share this link with you in the chat. So the world we seek, specifically our legislative policy statement, used to be a physical pamphlet, but now we've made some updates following and added some added language around reproductive health care and abortion as of annual meeting last year. So the most up-to-date version is this online version, although that we still have physical copies. But this outlines every single policy stance that we have, whether it's from migration, sorry, whether it's from migration to our approach to Middle East policy. The air just got very dry in here. Sorry. It's tickle season. Sorry about that. So the world that we seek is the basis. Give me 1 second. I'm going to open my door and let some humidity in.
So while we're waiting for Micah to come back and recover her breath, does anyone else have any comments to make? The FCNL had a wonderful workshop in Philadelphia a few years ago, which was essentially they wanted meetings to have a FCNL contact to write letters during the coffee hour. Okay, are you better now? Can you continue?
I can, but I appreciate you bringing that up, yeah. Susanna. And actually, as I was going to finish up this slide, just about how this is the The world we seek, in addition to the theories of change, is the basis of how we lobby. But the lobbying language and experience comes out of a Quaker tradition. And it also comes back to the idea that advocacy is rooted in our faith. And that's what connects us to our organization's partners, as well as people across many different faith traditions. And as I finished up that, I was going to offer a pause if anyone had any additional comments or questions related to what I've just shared. I don't see any, but if anything pops up, please put it in the chat or share it out. So those are specifically related to FCNL's work as it's been previously and as it is in the present. But something that really shapes the way that we're doing our work is Quaker advocacy in general. So advocacy in general is a specific approach that Quakers and many others take to advocating within the federal government, but it can also be within state and local governments. So advocacy is when you're talking to someone who holds power and trying to, very happy, and trying to change, enact change for something that you want, whether that's a specific policy or position change or a larger scale social issue. So it's shaped by history of friends and current institutions. So I'm not going to preach to the choir here and talk about Quaker values, but it's really grounded in Quakerism as an experiential faith, about a person's relationship to the divine, and also continuing revelation. We see that things within the political landscape change and mindsets develop, and these big scale shifts can happen. And Quakers are situated very well to adapt to those changes and adapt policy and legislative solutions to meet those as they come. So Quakerism being founded because of religious persecution has led Quakers to live out their faiths in new and sometimes challenging ways for the institutions that do exist. So we see that within current institutions, Quakers have been drivers for social change. And even though worldwide Quakers mostly identify as Christian, we recognize that the systems and policies functioning within the United States are still sometimes not representative of our faith and dedication to living faithfully for the values of Friends. So we're working to change these systems. We've seen Quakers do a lot of this over the past 80 years and beyond. And whether that's from our Quaker faith specifically or the processes that early friends and friends in the United States have gone through, we've seen them be bringers of change. And you see the yellow is kind of where we see the roots and the history of Quaker advocacy being founded from. And then once we get into Quaker advocacy, there are many different branches that one can take. Operates within the lobbying and organizing branches of Quaker advocacy, but direct action, so doing things with equate or educating, like a program like this, or all other forms of Quaker advocacy that are necessary to enact meaningful and sustainable change. So FCNL's approach, as I mentioned, is mostly lobbying, FCNL specifically as our lobbying organization, but our FCNL Education Fund and Friends Place on Capitol Hill does a lot of the educating and the organizing as well, which helps sustain a movement. So some common Quaker beliefs and values in FCNL's approach, as I mentioned earlier, seeking that of God in everyone. It's not something that you find sometimes in a lot of lobbying or legislative spaces. Some people just want to get things done and go straight to the issue, but by slowing things down and seeking that of God in everyone that you are interacting with, even if it's difficult, even if you have completely different viewpoints on an issue or throughout your whole ideological stances, still trying to find common ground has been transformational for FCNL's work. Relatedly, committed to working with everyone and building relationships, no matter what their identity is. FCNL has found a lot of success from both party aisles and found nonpartisan solutions to be the ones that really last. And also speaking truth to power and witnessing. We find that sometimes Quakers do not have all of the experience, and that we can't speak to some of the issues that we want to be advocating for, but by bringing others into the space, by letting them share their voices, we can witness how to do this work in community. And we can uplift the fact that we as staff or as a Quaker community cannot speak to those circumstances, and not try to speak on behalf of them, but witness their faith in action as well, whether that's explicitly or whether that's implicitly by them just showing up truthfully as themselves. Also within the political world, we know that there are a lot of challenges around this work and some roadblocks to progress, but we would not have been around for 80 years if this, and we also would not have been around for 80 years if this work was easy. And even if our goal is to hopefully work ourselves out of a job, for the time this work being led by a Quaker commitment to ongoing change and adaptation is where we have found sustainable ways and way opening for us to be situated well when lanes do open. So when you think of it in continuing revelation and by positioning ourselves to do right action, no matter what people on the Hill are telling us, no matter what movements are sparking up, we stay grounded in those things that we know we are well situated to do. And like some of the things that have happened over the past year with political divides and some of the conflicts within the Middle East, we have been steadily working around that work. So now when things really do hit the fan or become big issues being talked about on the news or among communities, we're able to provide the resources that are available. I also want to send in the chat, there's some other resources that we use a lot at FCNL, but one of which is a theological guide to a theological guide on Quaker lobbying. It's one of the first it is one of the first resources that I used to help me ground in this work specifically related to Quaker theology and identity. Does anyone have any questions about FCNL's approach and our grounding within Quaker perspective and ideologies?
Yeah, how do you all sit around like in meeting for worship and figure out what to do, or is there one person that I mean, this is actually very interesting. How do you decide which issue to take up?
That's a great question. Thank you. So we've actually been doing some restructuring and an approach of distributed leadership. But that's for kind of organization-wide decisions and how to go about making the decisions that work best for the organization as a whole, but also the staff that are a part of that organization. But for our legislative priorities and issues specifically, that's where we get a lot of the information from our priorities process. So if we ever have any pushback from individual communities or from people in offices on the Hill about why are you being so determined and so persistent on these issues that we tell you are not going to make movement, it's because we have done the hours and the months of work to collect the responses from friends across the country, and so that our advocacy is grounded and strengthened by those voices. We are not working because FCNL wants these things. We are that voice for friends within Congress who might either not have the means or the resources to come to Washington, D.C. on a daily or weekly basis. But we really are living out their faith and their values. Although we can't live out all of their values, we can't speak for every friend within the United States. We really do our best to collect and ask as many meetings and schools and organizations to tell us what they want us to advocate on, because we really listen, and that's how we ground our work. And then I also had the honor of going back, and we've made some changes to include how communities are connected to the issues they want us to work on. So sometimes it's even more in depth than just, we think this is important.
Does FCNL have a stand on the Russia-Ukraine war?
We do, and I'd be happy to send you more information after we have a lot of our legislative asks and our peace building staff. I'm sorry, I keep getting fits of coughing. Okie dokie. Well, I want to get into a little bit, and this might be very familiar to some folks, but when we look at not only Quaker advocacy and organizing, but also larger organizing for social activism, we see a breakdown of 4 roles, somewhat similar to the branches of that tree that I introduced. And these 4 roles are the advocate or reformer. And this is an identity that FCNL very much holds. An advocate is someone who is working with people in power to make change. So they're engaging and working within an existing system to change those systems from within. So FCNL does this by talking with Congresspeople. The second role of social activism is the organizer or the change agent role. I have 2 names on some of these because there's a couple of different models, one by Bill Moyer, and some have been adapted, including George Lakey has worked with a lot of these. But the organizer or the change agent role is someone who sustains that movement. So the organizer experiences joy from collecting people around a common cause, and individuals who may be working within little pockets. So there might be a team working on an issue in Ohio and a team working on an issue in New Mexico. But an organizer will pull all of those people doing similar work to really rally together and to make their work more impactful on who they're trying to make a difference within. The helper or the citizen role is someone who helps mitigate the effects of an issue as they're happening. So the advocate and the organizer are doing some long-term planning. They are making conversations. They are trying to build for change. But the helper realizes that there are negative impacts affecting people right now. And in order to sustainably make a movement, you need to help those people now, whether that's giving out water, whether that's fundraising for people, whether that's getting people out of Gaza and either into the United States or into Cairo, and doing some of that work that helps save lives while they're at risk. The 4th role is the rebel role, and this is someone who is kind of working outside of the system. So this is someone doing protests or direct actions or disrupting the system in order to pull attention to a problem or injustice. You need all 4 of these roles in order to make a successful social movement, because all of them balance each other as you're putting pressure on a system and pushing from within a system to help people enact change. So we come back to this structure a lot in our work because, as I mentioned, FCNL usually acts as that advocate or that organizer, rallying people together, but we need those people who are doing direct actions, and we need those people who are being helpers in their communities, because that gives us space to do our own work. So since I've been talking a little bit, although we've had some questions, discerning where you fit in, either to the 4 roles of social activism or whether you fit into Quaker advocacy's branches, is a discernment of your own gifts and leadings. Sometimes someone will operate within a lobbying or an organizing lane, but they can also shift in and out depending on what a situation calls. So I want to get a sense if anyone has done this work before. And I know we have somewhat of a small group, but happy to hear from who is here. But I want to see if anyone has met in person or online with an elected official or staff. And you can either raise your physical hand or your virtual hand if you've ever done this. And if not, then we'll get to learn about it. What about if you've written an email or called an elected official? I see Lois has done that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Every time I'm sent. You know, I told you I'm in Puerto Rico. I go to 1, 2, or 2 rallies a week for Palestine, which it really seems like we're spinning our wheels. But yeah.
So those are both kind of within the lobbying area. Who's attended a protest or demonstration?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, of course. They're fun and they're very community building, but those are within the direct action and rebel role. Those are working outside of a system to put pressure on it. What about have any of you organized in your community for change? I know Lois has, since she called me here today.
Have I organized my community? Yeah. Sure.
That'd be the organizer and sometimes the educating role. Sometimes those can be somewhat synonymous. So I wanted to get into a little bit more specifics. We've got about 15 minutes left about specifically Spirit in Action and some stories of advocacy. I said that FCNL, one of FCNL's theories of change is storytelling, because we realize that stories are what actually propel people to be reminded that these are humans behind policies and the impacts. The first thing I want to mention about FCNL's work that's really salient right now is our work around ceasefire in Gaza and in the Middle East. So FCNL, along with our WISC coalition partners, which is WISC stands for Washington Interfaith Staffers Community. So really channeling into a network of people with different values and different perspectives, but gathering around a shared cause or interest. But we've been able to gather with them in the days following the initial attacks and violence in Gaza and Israel to push legislators for a ceasefire, like I said, in the following days that this occurred. Following an interfaith letter that was published and shared and circulated with some of those organizational partners, our 2 Middle East staff, Odelia Matter and Tassan Al-Tayab, have been hosting Ceasefire Now weekly coalition calls that bring together 70 Quaker communities, that bring together 70 plus organizations doing this work. We've had a lot of success, as I'll mention later, with some of our Mennonite brothers and sisters that have been really organized, and by pairing with them and doing some of that relationship building and community building, we've been able to connect with them and attend lobbying visits with them to boost the voices that are calling for a ceasefire. I also want to uplift within this community and that we've had 70 Quaker communities submit meeting minutes of concern around the violence that has occurred. This is the largest number of minutes we've received on any issue. It's been a call that we're very grateful to have answered. And you can find that collection of minutes that I will send in the chat. I'm trying to be good about my links because I prepared them. And also, we've also put out a ceasefire meeting minute cover letter that friends are encouraged to, after they've written a minute of concern, to use that cover letter to share their minute with their legislator, because a minute is great for understanding where your community is at on an issue, and just the process of creating such a minute. But then we really want to make sure that the people that are representing your community, whether that's one congressperson or distributed over different districts, is hearing your call for a ceasefire and calling action. That's how we support communities doing this work, because it's not just us calling. And yeah, and also, as I mentioned, there have been some interfaith collaborations between our nationwide advocacy teams and Mennonite communities. These are some of the most powerful stories I've heard of our advocacy teams that are mostly Quaker and based out of Quaker meetings, pairing with Mennonite communities that are also interested in advocating on this issue. Ceasefire has been advocacy teams' issue that they're lobbying on for the past year, and they've been able to build a lot of communities around their faith and grounded in faith to support these issues. So in addition to our faith-based advocacy, we've also seen the power of conversations and relationship building. So not only bridging those divides related to religious and some ideological differences, but doing some just and resilient democracy work. So one of my colleagues, Garrett Simmons, as I shared, attended this Braver Angels Network conference at the end of June that focused on conversations between Americans with opposing political viewpoints. So this is a big concern that we are dealing with in the American political landscape, that people have almost exactly opposite or contradictory viewpoints about policy or social justice issues. And a concern is, how do we move forward? How do we bridge those divides and find common ground with people who have starkly contradictory viewpoints? And some of the work that FCNL has been doing has been focused around this and sharing that within our FCNL advocacy teams networks to model this for community members. Yes, that's been a wonderful program that we've actually just started piloting after some listening tours that we did over the last year. And it's called Bridging Gaps Through Dialogue. So if there's I know there's not an advocacy teams within Philadelphia, but do you know what the closest advocacy teams to you all would be? Susanna or Lois? Well, that might be a connection we can do after this call. To finish out on some of these stories, one thing that's been difficult for me working within FCNL is this long-term change. It's something that I want to see the results of my work now or right when I check it off my to-do list, but FCNL has really committed themselves to long-term change that is grounded in our faith. One of the most recent examples of this is the Truth and Healing Commission on the Indian Boarding School Policies Act in the United States. This is a bill that has seen many forms throughout the House and throughout the Senate as it's been edited and put back to committees and edited some more and delayed on being voted on. But it's the commission that calls for but it's the bill that calls for a commission to look into what happened with Indian boarding school policies in the United States. This is something that Quakers have been doing a lot of talking about, and our role in organizing and facilitating some of those boarding schools. And we've been advocating for this for years, specifically FCNL's Advocacy Corps focused on this for a whole year back in 2022. So we had more than 10 organizers doing this community work in their local either school towns or hometowns. And so they've been doing that work 2 years ago. Our Spring Lobby Weekend this past March, so a couple months ago, was focused on this commission. And now we are happy to see that that a vote has actually been scheduled for the end of next week on Friday to actually have it be voted on in the Senate. So this is a great example, and we can see that the work that's gone over the past 2+ years, but sometimes this work takes longer than that. It takes decades. And being grounded in faith and being grounded in our actions showing up no matter what's going on the Hill, adjusting sometimes, but still showing up for truth-telling and for restorative justice is how we continue doing this work and finding those successes along the way.
Can I ask
want to
you
pause
about,
here. Yeah.
Can I ask you about how what your relationship with AFSC is? And I know that they're more international, but it sounds like FCNL is both national, state, international, local. Right? I mean,
that's a great clarifying question. So FCNL specifically focuses on federal legislation.
Okay.
So that's legislation that is happening within national Congress, but we see that the trickle-down effects of our work impact state and local communities as well. Okay. Our relationship with AFSC is strong, but we do work on different issues sometimes. So my predecessor, Bobby Trice, was doing some calls with AFSC's previous Quaker Engagement director before Brian Blackmore. So there is some overlap, especially when our priorities overline with their priorities, but we work more so in parallel to them and supporting calls that they're doing and supporting work that we're doing. But it's really a balance of back and forth.
So there's no organization then, no Quaker organization that's working on the state level.
No, and I'm not sure if that's because each state has their own body of Congress. So I'm not sure if that would then apply to monthly meetings and or to yearly meetings, but even within a yearly meeting, we see that it would be hard to say one way to do something because of those differences.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left, so if any other friends have questions, I encourage you to ask them now. The last part of this presentation is me sharing about upcoming opportunities for friends to get involved with if they're interested in any of this work, but I want to leave space for friends to ask any questions if something's specifically coming to mind.
Yeah. Was FCNL ever involved in trying to stop the condition of apartheid in Palestine? Because I know AFSC was for years. They've been, and so of course is Amnesty International. But is this a recent thing, FCNL?
So we've had a Middle East policy portfolio, or at least I'm trying to think of when it was started, but that's been one of our top policy portfolios that we've had staff on. So we've done some work with the original apartheid back in the 40s. But I can't speak to the specifics, so I don't want to misinform anyone.
Well, that's actually good to know. Yeah.
I will actually mention it now since you brought it up. We will be having one of our Quaker Changemakers events this upcoming Wednesday. That's going to be about students uniting and college campus advocacy over the centuries. And I believe that Jim Kaysen will be sharing about some of his organizing work on Earlham's campus back in the 60s and 70s around the apartheid.
Okay.
Well, I do want to share some of these programs in case people here now or people who watch in the future are interested in getting involved or sharing any of these opportunities. Some of our most robust programs are part of our young adult programs. The program assistant cohort or fellowship that I was a part of for the past year gives young adults the opportunity to be full-time staff with FCNL for September through July. And similarly for the summer internships, it's just for the summer, but it's a great opportunity to get involved in the lobbying world, in the advocacy world, and learn about this work for specific time periods. We also have 2 other young adult programs that are available to young friends. We classify young friends as between 18 and 40. And our young adult program, Spring Lobby Weekend, is actually available to friends in high school, so you don't have to be 18 to attend that one. But advocacy Corps is an opportunity, a part-time opportunity for friends who want to organize in their communities over 10 months. So there's one topic that they focus on, and it is an opportunity to learn and organize, and then kind of learn if you want to continue doing this work, either with FCNL or another organization. And Spring Lobby Weekend is a great kind of entry point for young adults into the lobbying and advocacy world. It's a 4-day conference in March that is really focused on professional development for the young adults that come. So they're learning about lobbying and an ask that FCNL wants to rally around and focus on, but also it's a great time to network and just to learn how to do this work within DC.
That's great.
My work specifically is some of this travel to meetings in schools. I also do a lot of work with Friends Place on Capitol Hill, which provides programs for people to stay when they visit DC. But it's really engaging communities that want either more information or want broad information about FCNL or more specific information. We provide a diversity of programs. And also our advocacy teams network is as put a nationwide network. We have advocacy teams in 49 states and over 130 advocacy teams across the country that do a lot of this work when we call on communities saying that legislators are sick of hearing our voices and seeing our faces, and they schedule calls and they do this community building. And as I said, sometimes other powerful things like that bridging divides listening tour can come out of some of the work that they're doing. And it's really astounding. I'm going to leave this on the screen for anyone who follows up on it after the fact, but these are some contact information and websites for people who are interested in getting information about young adult programs, about advocacy teams, or about Quaker Engagement. There are short links to the places they live on our website and some staff contacts if you're interested.
Do you still look for point people at each meeting?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we still ask for Quaker contacts. That was a priority that our Quaker Engagement team was picking up last year, but with some staff turnovers, we're more so focusing on the programmings that people ask us to do. But it's a continuous thing about asking if someone has vacated the clerkship or vacated and moved to another meeting. So yes, we still look for point people who can deliver some of the information that we send out, either in the monthly newsletter or in specific asks that we push out to Quaker communities.
That's great. Yeah. It's all about education, isn't it?
Yeah, that's originally why I was drawn to this work. My background, as I mentioned, is in education and social work. And our Quaker Engagement work is very much overlapping between the lobbying, but really pulling more people into that work. I was very intimidated with lobbying with DC and Capitol Hill when I first started. And I think still a little bit, since I get the joy of working with community members and constituents most often in what I do with my work, but seeing people light up, especially young adults, when they have their first experience lobbying, and it's not as scary as they thought, and it's empowering, having their voices be heard by people who are making decisions, is one of the joys of my work.
Yeah.
Well, friends, to finish up, this won't be evergreen, but it's useful for friends that are in attendance tonight. We do have some upcoming programs that I invite you all to attend if you are able. One actually is evergreen, which is our Witness Wednesday Silent Reflection, which is every Wednesday from 5:15 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So that's something that I host with a group of about 25 to 30 people coming out every Wednesday evening, and it's a really beloved community that I would encourage you all to attend if you're able to. We also have our monthly Quaker Changemakers event, Students Uniting Then and Now, that I mentioned a little bit, which is going to be a panel with 4 intergenerational organizers. So from the 60s and 70s to current organizers working at Georgetown on ceasefire and disinvestment. It's going to be a great discussion where they're going to talk about how they're doing this work and how it relates to FCNL's work as well, and FCNL's values. Then we've got a Light in Gaza book club online, and let me send these. I will send these as soon as I stop screen sharing and make sure that everyone can have the links, and I'll follow up with Lois as well so they can be shared. Because there's an event on August 1st. That's a wonderful book club that our friends at Friends Place on Capitol Hill are hosting. And then an intro to advocacy with FCNL. So if anyone within your community has never lobbied before and is interested in what that process looks like from a Quaker perspective, that's a great way to get your foot in the door and to learn more. Our advocacy team's friends host those, and they are wonderful. And I know Alexander mentioned it at the beginning, that he's attended some of our annual meetings over the years. And as of end of last week, our registration for annual meeting is up. And our theme for this year is advocacy that never gives up. So we're seeing a lot of frustration with what's going on with politics these days, and trying to be that grounding force for people who still want to get involved and are frustrated, and honoring that, but knowing that our advocacy efforts never give up. And that is all I have for you today, friends. Are there any final questions before we log off?
Yeah, I'm interested in I'm interested in how everyone works together. Okay, because it sounds like you're working with EQUAT one way or another. You're working with meetings. You're working with AFSC. What other organizations are you working with? And how do you all? AFSC puts out these enormous reports, the same way as Amnesty International. Do you do that too?
We do. We actually just put out a policy report on violence interrupters and community violence interruption work. So, which I can share afterwards. But I think the short answer to your question, Susanna, is that depending on the issue, we work with a lot of different organizations, whether that's within that Washington interfaith staffers community that we see working within Washington, D.C. on these issues from an interfaith perspective. And then we also have the nationwide network of Quaker organizations doing this work alongside one another. And it really relates to the 4 roles of social activism diagram that I shared. FCNL can't be organizing as many of those direct actions or even education on specific topics that other organizations can be. So it's kind of a balance of how do we stay true to what our strengths are as a lobbying and organizing organization, and also support the work of other organizations and look for places where our work can overlap.
Yeah, I could see that it would be very easy for, I mean, there's so many things going on. I could see it'd be very easy to become overwhelmed by by being involved in so many different issues. I mean, do you have like a mathematical formula? 5 issues a year or something like that? I mean, how do you not get overwhelmed?
I found that the way that staff do not get overwhelmed is actually going back to the priorities process. Is the stressful time for figuring out what our work is going to look like happens from April of, so it started in April of this year, is when we closed submissions for people to submit their priorities. So it's from April until November that our policy committee does really laborious, important work, combing over all of the details of the submissions that Friends meetings or organizations submit. And that's why we've actually started asking Friends to explain what their connections are to the work. If they have people within their community that are organizing with another organization or have been hosting migrants or have been fundraising as a part of their community, and really trying not to create more work for ourselves or do work where others are doing work, but where we can live into our identity as a lobbying organization, but know that there's power in people, and that's one of our approaches to the work as well. And how do we organize people where they feel sustained and where they don't feel like they're doing the exact same thing with one organization after another, of only going into the basics? And how do we support the building of community so we can go deeper and so that we can really get to the root of these issues and enact change that's, as I said, sustainable?
Well, if you ever become interested in Puerto Rico, I can hook you up with something. I mean, we're very upset in Puerto Rico. We have one representative in Congress, and this person is a member of the United States Republican Party, and she's running for governor. You know, I mean, there's a lot of issues. The organization that I do all the rallies with in Palestine, it's called Madres contra la Guerra, and the lady who's been running it, Dr. Sonia Santiago Hernandez. She started it about 2001 over the Iraq War. She was trying to get people not to join the military, and in Puerto Rico, just about every male I have met has spent time in the military. In fact, maybe all of them. I mean, it's so. And she said she became interested in pacifism. First of all, her husband was in Vietnam, and then her son was in Iraq. She became interested by interacting with Quakers when she was in Berkeley doing a PhD. So I just thought that was interesting. So that's an organization you've probably never heard of. But this is an extremely I don't know how effective they are, but they're very active in Puerto Rico. And of course, at the moment, they're concerned with Palestine, but not just Palestine. I mean, everywhere. You know, what's going on in Haiti, what's going on, you know, everything.
Congo, yeah.
So that's so if we want people to, if we want FCNL to lobby on behalf of Puerto Rico, as far as I know, I'm the only Quaker here in Puerto Rico, which is another issue. I mean, there's got to be others, but I haven't met any. So so what do? Just write a letter by myself and say I'm a Quaker at large, a member of Arch Street.
That might be the way to go. I know that FWCC also has some resources about finding Quaker meetings within the Americas in general, but I think that's where, like, if you have your power in your one-person community and you want to share that message with your congressperson or their office, we also are in the business of empowering you to do that, because if that's where you have power, naming where you have power is important.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, my congressperson is in in Camden County, New Jersey. His name's Donald Norcross.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Camden County has an enormous Puerto Rican population. That's actually good. See, this is why we do this. You gave me a very good idea. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. All right. So it's a two-way thing. It's not it's not us just asking you to do things. It's you asking us to do things too.
Yes, it's very much a two-way relationship
and giving us the information that we need in order to do it. Well,
yep,
that's
the
great.
support and the support and the information.